right, girls, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to the time period. We're getting ready to read Beowulf, so we're finally leaving the Renaissance. We're going way back in English history. You can see the dates here. Geological signs indicate that Paleolithic man arrived about 50,000 years before an ice cap actually severed Britain from the continent and it became an island. But one of the earliest kind of westward migrations was made by people who now live in Scotland, Ireland, Wales. These are called the Celts. And these tribes spoke a language called a Gaelic language, and they were natives of Britain and the British Isles long before the English were. The Celtic Britons, then, as they were called, inhabited the island for years and years and years. Of course, the Romans invaded and controlled for a certain amount of time, but when the Romans withdrew in the 5th century, so here we are approaching our timeline, after the Romans withdrew, Germanic tribes began to invade and threaten the Celtic people. And one of these barbaric tribes was known as the Angles. And so you can see in the year 449, these are Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. And I'll show you a map in just a minute. Invaded the island, the Britain Islands. And they sailed across the North Sea from the Denmark area and took control of the island. Then you can see that in the late 6th century, and because this is so long ago, a lot of times we don't have specific dates, but we do have a general idea of the timeline. So in the late 6th century, we have Christianity, which is brought to the island and slowly but surely begins to take root there. Beowulf is actually written down. So Beowulf is an epic poem, started out in the oral tradition, and it is actually written down about the 8th century. It survives in a single manuscript, you know, it is the longest poem that we have. It's 3,182 lines long, and it is I mean, we only have about 30,000 lines or so of poetry from this time period that even exist, and Beowulf certainly is a good majority of that. The beginnings of British literature then in the British Isles are not classical Latin or Greek. This is really the English language then is kind of the oldest surviving vernacular language. That just means it's kind of the language of the people. When the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes came over, their language really kind of took control, as did they, so that now it's just nearly impossible to write a modern English sentence without using some Anglo-Saxon words. In fact, I think the 100 most common words in English are thought to be all of Anglo-Saxon origin. And notice that it was written down in the 8th century. It's a much older poem, probably taking place much earlier in time, and it was passed down orally for years and years and years before there was a written language so that it could be written down. And of course, Christianity brought Latin and this written language to the islands, and then people were able to kind of you know, catalog history. And so Beowulf would have been an important history of these people, and it was finally able to be written down. And so then we end what's called the Old English time period, this Anglo-Saxon time period, with a very famous date of 1066. I'm sure you're familiar with the invasion of William of Normandy and the Battle of Hastings, and this kind of ushered in a whole new era. So the time period that we're talking about here is really from the mid 5th century all the way through the Norman Conquest. All right, let's talk for a second about the where the Anglos, the Saxons, and the Jutes come from, just so you can have an idea as you're reading the poem. I think it's helpful. The setting does change. So here's a map, right? This is the island of the British Isles here, right? And we have Ireland over here. If you jump over, and of course here are the Netherlands, right? And here's Germany. If you jump over here to what is Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and then look at this, which is kind of a blow up of that area. You see the similar shapes. So this is Norway, this is Sweden, and this is Denmark today. The Angles, as you can see, and the Saxons and the Jutes are all from this area. So what they do is they get on their ships about 449, and they sail across the sea here and invade the British Isles and take over and really take control. In the poem that you're going to read, Beowulf is a Dane. So at the beginning of the poem, they're going to talk about, the people that Beowulf comes to help are Danes. Hrothgar is the king of the Danes. So at the beginning of the poem, you're going to hear about Herit. You can see that. That's Herit right there. It's a part of Denmark. Beowulf's home is over here. Beowulf is a Geat, and you'll hear him refer to that term. So he comes here, gets on a ship, sails down this way, and lands in Herit to help King Hrothgar, whose people are being attacked by this monster. So you can get an idea of kind of where all of this is taking place, and that we are probably talking about a period of time when the poem is taking place that is much closer to 449 than it is to the 8th century when the poem was written down. But it is important to remember that when the poem was written down, England was a Christian country, right? Christianity had come to the islands in the late 6th century. So what you have is probably a Christian clergyman, because these were the people who were most literate, actually writing down, documenting the history of this poem. Well, the poem took place in a time when the British Isles were pagan. So you have this very pagan culture being recorded by this very Christian clergyman. And what you will find is that you find elements of both a pagan culture and a Christian culture as you read. And I think that's really an important thing for you to remember as you read.